right, so one of the coolest topics that we discuss throughout this week is cryptography. And I have, at first, when I first started to get into information security, this was quite daunting to me. But then over time, I think I fell in love with it. And it's either fortunate or unfortunate for people. And I guess you can be the judge of me today as I try to decrypt cryptography for you. That's right. That's what I said. So, it's been around since the beginning of time. So humans really have the root of our existence is to try to have secrecy and to try to do things in private. And cryptography historically is all over the place. So if you go back and look at the timelines and civilizations throughout ancient history into medieval times and all the way to even modern cryptography, cryptography really has the roots and begins with the hieroglyphics in Egypt. If you're not familiar with those, you've probably been sleeping under a rock, but those were used to decorate the tombs and tell the story of the life of those that had moved on or deceased or died. And their intention was, really not the practice of about hiding the messages, but rather intended to try to make the story almost like a ceremony, and for some people, majestic in a way. And it's really evolved since then. The practical applications of that are typically used to hide information from others. And so in that particular case, that use case, if you're not a master of the glyphics, the picto art, then you'd have difficulty interpreting that. And what's interesting is if you just look at the timeline of it, some people say that the Kama Sutra was a form of cryptography because many of the things that went on, things that are kind of taboo or not often talked about, sometimes those need to be encrypted. And even ancient Hebrew is used a cryptographic technique where they would use the alphabet and flip each letter on its head to try to really map the different letters and shifting the alphabet in one way. It was called Atbash. And if you're familiar with that, you may know what I'm talking about. And so the naive approach is to try to, based off of those ancient civilizations and even now into modern cryptography, to figure out a way that either you can substitute information or transpose it. So, replacing it with substitution, or transposing it, moving it from character to character. And so at its simplistic context, that really is what we're trying to do, either confuse people or try to obfuscate through the techniques that are used, which is kind of cool. And if just, going through the history again, trying to figure out exactly what to think, I would say that, the history of it, again, were something BC, or maybe it was late 300 BC, the Spartans actually used encryption. And, they would take a piece of papyrus, and that piece of papyrus would be wrapped around a wooden staff or a stick, and they would actually, it was called a sictale. I just put it into the chat window. And what they would do is they would have this stick, and they would wrap the message around the stick, and that would be a certain size. You would have to have that certain size stick. The person that was receiving it would have to have that certain size stick. And in order for it to match up properly, for you to decrypt, definitely would need the same size stick. And in that case, the stick would be the key. Julius Caesar developed a shift cipher. And it was similar to that Hebrew encryption scheme of @bash that I mentioned before, but essentially just rotated the shift one way or another. In particular, for Caesar, that shift cipher was a ROT3, a rotate 3, from the left to the right. So if you've ever done any research on that, it's pretty cool. And some of those are quite simple. So again, I remember growing up, one of my friends down the street had all the paid channels on cable. I remember there was this one show that back in the day I really enjoyed, and it was called, and maybe you guys remember this, it's still on, I've watched it since then. It's called Tales from the Crypt. It's got this perfect time of year here, with Halloween coming strong, where it's got this cackling skeleton dude that each one of these episodes, the eyes, the idea of it is each one of these episodes has foreshadowing and a hidden message that to the subtle watcher typically would not be revealed, but for the more astute fans of that show, you would see the hidden meanings in there. But for our purposes here, we talked this week about this, the idea of the CIA triad. And the reason why I bring this up is because the word crypt comes from the Greek to mean to hide, or to hide writing or hidden writing. And for our purposes, this CIA triad, which has continued to rear its head all throughout the week, is important here, or at least two of them are important, right? In our case right here, for cryptography, we do not want it to be available. Why? Why would we not want it to be available? Hidden is best. Should be private. Absolutely, positively. Yeah, and so all of this kind of comes together in a way that's really meaningful for everybody. And for us, whenever we're talking about this, we want it to be authenticated. We want the data to have integrity, and we want to enforce or be able to trace non-repudiation, right? And I can't deny, if I'm doing cryptography, you don't want to mess with me, right? You like how I did that? And so for non-repudiation, we can't deny that something didn't come from somewhere. And so let's say you're driving down the road, you're sexting your girlfriend going 55 miles an hour, and all of a sudden, boom, you come to the middle of a intersection, and you run the red light, you hit somebody, you T-bone them, and I know, the gloom and doom first thing in the morning, but that stuff happens. And ultimately, here in Alabama, Alexander Shunneraw, or and there in Atlanta, Morgan and Morgan, for the people, would be on you like flies on stink chasing that ambulance, right? And I say that because now, because you were on your phone, and you were distracted driving or texting while driving, they would have a log or a ledger of things that happened while you were driving. And so you cannot deny that you were doing something when that event happened. And because of that, it would probably hold up its weight in court. And so for us to actually do it, it's important for us to make sure we understand this vernacular. In order for us to authenticate into this crypto system, what we need to do is we need to come up with how we can be part of this crypto system. So check this out. You're going to be hearing me talking a whole bunch of garbage, a whole bunch of junk here. I shouldn't say junk or garbage because this is some good stuff. One of those terms is how do we authenticate people? And we do that, put it on the screen here. We do that by what we call enrolling people or users into the crypto system. Okay, so we enroll people, and once we enroll people into the system, they become part of what we typically will call the realm of trust. Sometimes we call it, let me just put a pipe here, we call it the web of trust as well. So when we enroll somebody into our crypto system, whether it's PKI or PGP or symmetric or asymmetric, they become part of our sphere of influence, our web of trust, our realm of trust, kind of Lord of the Rings, if you will, the realm of trust, right? And from that, it's kind of cool because we call that a claimed identity at that point. That person's been authenticated. We put them through the ringer with, the enrollment official. We have given them the luxury of being able to come in, prove to us who they are, who they say they are, through those I-9 documents that I was mentioning about yesterday. And because of that, it really gains that level of trust. And with trust, then allows us to also, you guessed it, have integrity. So we can, once we're in this realm of trust or this web of trust, the system, the software, we now trust everybody who is within there, whether it's a CAC that you have, whether it's a key fob that allows you to do it. You're in our web of trust. And from that, in addition to all this coolness that we've already talked about, we can now also digitally sign things within that web of trust. And in order for us to do that, there's two types of cryptographies that we want to just make sure that we understand. And we've done that with CryptoBucket so far over the last few sessions. And really it comes to life with symmetric encryption and asymmetric encryption. And so we'll jump into those first and kind of enumerate both of those. And then we'll get into talking about hashing. And I'm excited, and I hope you are as well. Let's keep trucking. So at its root here, I think that for some of you, just looking back at the roster and the copious notes that I took, I'm looking at some of these, and many of you said whatever domain is cryptography, that's my dud. So I feel like I don't want to placate you, but at the same sense, I kind of want to just build the foundation and put you in a position where you know enough to be dangerous here, enough to answer a lot of these test questions. And maybe there's somebody out there that you listen to what this topic is and the way that it's explained here, and it's something that you want to start to investigate further. But it starts with plain text, and this is typically what we typically say with this is that it's human readable. Plain text is human readable. Yeah, it's clear text as well. And many of us already know what that is. Clear text. We can read it, right? We we take that, we put it into some sort of algorithm, and it becomes this magical hidden text, right? This ciphertext, this encrypted message. We always need some sort of key, and this is going to be a unique value that whoever owns this data knows it, and they have to be able to provide that to you in order for you to decrypt it. Well, there's a bunch of things that happen or need to happen in order for me to share my key with you. If I am not in a crypto system, so if I am not in the software crypto system, or hardware as well, but that implies you have physical access to it. If I am not part of that realm of trust, then you are not privy to any of the algorithms that I use or any of the keys that I use. And that is a whole nother discipline within cryptography to try to break the code. And so the time that it takes to try to break any of these encryption schemes is known as the work factor. The work factor. And I'll put that into the chat right here. So the work factor is the time to break the crypto system. That's just going to be my 5 words to describe that. And so what we're going to do is just go through and explain the ways that some of these work. And at a high level, I hope by the end of this you'll be like, okay. And if not, then I haven't failed. It's just So we start off with plain text over here: destroy the bridge at 2300 on February 12th. Why we got to be so negative here? Why don't we build the bridge at 2300? Anyway, so we're destroying the bridge at 2300. We put that information into an algorithm. We add a key to it, and a little voodoo happens here and creates this thing called the ciphertext, which is supposed to be unintelligible, right? And we'll go through how that works here in a few minutes. And so that's really the scheme, and a super high level for all of this stuff, right, is down here at the bottom. Plain text gets put into an algorithm, we add a key, and then ciphertext comes out. And so we do a reverse Zabby-Dob going the other way, where we have the ciphertext, we put it into that same encryption algorithm, we use the key to get the plain text back, right? And so the trick is, if we're not in the same realm of trust, so if we're sending this, over a radio, or I'm thinking, World War I, World War II, or we're sending this over the WAN, the public internet. How can we be sure that in an untrusted medium that we get our key from point A to point B without it being intercepted? And that's the whole premise of what the Diffie-Hellman algorithm comes into play, is sharing those keys across a public internet, which is kind of cool. And we'll jump into that here in a few minutes. So as we continue to dive deeper into this, we need to be familiar with a few just super high level concepts for purposes of our exam. And the next couple slides, I'm going to go into that. And so first and foremost is this notion of zero knowledge proof. Zero knowledge proof. And so you can actually take an object and without revealing the object itself, you can put it into what's called an escrow account, digital escrow account. And by doing that, it allows us to have it for either a later time or to be able to use if we're part of that realm of trust. While we're doing that, we want to make sure that we understand the differences between encryption and decryption. You remember the first day when I was talking about hashing, I mentioned hashes are used for integrity only. Integrity only. And so it's important for us to realize or recognize the distinction between hashing and encryption. And so with hashes, we can create this thing that's called a message digest. And conveniently, that's one of the hashing algorithms. What that is a the highlights. Exactly. So it's an abridged version of a Pulitzer Prize article that was written, or a short story that was taken from a larger and condensed into something that, while you're at the doctor's office, that 3 to 5 minutes that you're using the bathroom before you go into the doctor's office, you could possibly read the entire article. Whereas if you were, looking at it from another perspective, you might actually be, you would definitely not be able to read the actual article in that 3 to 5 minutes time. So it's an abridged version. I remember, I was introduced to these things called Cliff's Notes. I remember, when I first saw that, I was like, just giving an example here. There was one class that I was taking where, when I was not a good student yet, the teacher had a whole bunch of things that we needed to do by the time that we were getting ready to do the midterm. And of course, I procrastinated, waited to the last minute, like, 90% of the people that are out there. And, I went to the bookstore and certainly I bought the little pamphlet. And so those Cliff's Notes would be just like the Reader's Digest, the condensed version of that. And so the idea or the notion that anytime on your exam where you see this word, digest, and you'll probably have 2 questions where you'll see the word digest on your exam, that should immediately give you the context clue that they're talking about a hash. They're talking about a hash. Whether it's the MD, the message digest, or some cyclic redundancy check, or maybe a message authentication code, HMAC, hashing message authentication code. It's a smaller condensed version of a larger message. And like you guys were saying, great examples there. A cover page, yeah, the highlights, yeah, and so that's really the notion of some of those things that I just mentioned. And so that's a hash, and usually that's a one-way function. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the birthday attack and the avalanche effect here in a few minutes, but we'll get into that here in a couple minutes. And then for encryption, it's a two-way function. So instead of it just being like the hash being a one-way, this actually we do encryption on one side of the house, and then it needs to be decrypted as well. And so it is reversible. And whenever we talk about encryption, remember, hashing is not encryption. Whenever we talk about encryption, it's a reversible process that gives us exactly this in the CIA triad, right? So the confidentiality. And so in addition to these terms, there's a few more that I want to kind of just off the top of the dome give you, and we can enumerate it. So split knowledge is a key term here that typically we see, and usually this is something that you sometimes will see in movies. And so this is where two people, usually we'll say it's two, have different information, and neither one of them knows what the other person has. But together, that information, when it's aggregated together, it can be lethal. It can be lethal. Sometimes, metaphorically, you'll hear people talk about, I'll do one pipe here, this other concept that's called dual control. And that's typically what we see in the movies is dual control, where, you know, somebody may have the launch codes to something. And let's say me and Brandon both have the launch codes, and they're on a key on our lanyard. The launch system for this nuclear weapon is, you know, 15 feet wide, so even Shaquille O'Neal couldn't reach one key to the other. Maybe he could. He's 7 foot, so he probably does have a pretty long. So let's say it's 20 feet, just so I hedge my bets there. You know, with the idea that I take my key, I put it in over here. Brandon has his key. He's far enough away that he's over there putting his key in, and at the same time, we have to aggregate what we know, our launch code, to be able to make this magic happen. And so split knowledge, sometimes, you know, coupled to dual control like that, like I meant, is typically how we refer to that. So that's one keyword that I want to make sure that we cover. And not only for your own personal enrichment, but good chance that either split knowledge will be on the exam or the concept of dual control. So both of those could absolutely be on the exam. M of N control, this means that the minimum number of agents is M and the total population is N. And what they do is they work together to perform different tasks. And we'll talk about this one a little bit in a few minutes, but at a high level, just know M of N, and I'll go in and show you some of that functionality here with specific functions when we do certain types of exercises here. In addition to that, there's another key word that sometimes you'll see. It's called a nonce. And that nonce is a random number that's generated that is a one-time unique value. Typically, we associate that nonce to one-time pads or one-time passwords. And we're going to talk about those here in a few minutes. Usually, it's what we call an XOR operand. An XOR operand, and we're going to do that here in a few minutes as well. So if you've never heard of XOR or one-time pad, that's okay. We're going to jump into it. An example of that is not the Roman numeral 4 here. It is the initialization vector. So it's a random number that's generated. And if you're familiar with wireless technology, any wireless radios, WEP used initialization vectors. WPA used initialization vectors. And WPA2 also used initialization vectors. When each one of these was cracked, they tried to make it more robust with those random, by expanding the key length and also the value. But that is something that is like a practical application of a nonce initialization vector. And then finally down here, the work factor is, you know, the effort or the time that's required to actually break the crypto system. And good chance you'll see at least a mentioning of that on the exam. And so out of here, you know, I mentioned you typically with the crypto bucket, you'll have 5 to 7 questions. Well, you can expect it, you know, from some of these other topics that I'm kind of saying usually show up on the exam. You can expect that, you know, it may not seem like it, but they're going to pepper in some of these words into the questions. So it's at a high level. It's good for you to, at least conceptually, 10 miles wide and an inch deep, understand what these are.